Okay, let's go. So this is my talk, The Expatriate Teacher of English. So I'm going to start by saying my name is Susan, and I'm a recovering expat. I've actually been living back in my country of origin for 7 years, but I lived abroad for 25 years. I started teaching in Colombia when I was 18. Went back to university in Seattle, where I'm from. The day after I graduated, I went right back to Colombia. I drove. It took me 4 months to get there. My other countries are Portugal, Spain, 8 years in Kenya, 15 years in London, and 2 years in Switzerland. So, there was 1 year actually in between Spain and Kenya where I was in Alaska, which I count as a foreign country. And I was working in restaurants and bars to pay off my school debts. I got my MA at S.I.T, where I now teach. And I was working in restaurants and bars. I was working in like 5 or 6 all at the same time. I did more than a month of double shifts, and everybody knew what I was doing. Everybody that I was working with knew that I was working really hard to pay off my debts, put a little bit of money in the bank so that I was going to go to Africa. And there was a young American busboy who said to me with great perplexity, "Why would you want to leave the best country in the world?" And we laugh at it, but he really, really didn't understand it. So I think I'm dedicating this talk to him as I try to explain to myself and to you why it is that we live in other countries. So this is a workshop. It doesn't look like a workshop room, but there are going to be times when you are going to talk about your own experience. This is what I think we're going to do. Oh, it's a funny. Uh-oh. There we go. Oops. Sorry, I should have tried this out first. This is what I'm planning for us to talk about, but because it's a workshop, we might do other things. So we're going to talk about who we are as expats. We're going to talk a bit about cultural identity, because that was my first exploration, is that maybe expats are cultural marginals. I'm going to tell you about the project that I did. I'm going to help you understand some of the other readings and other studies that have been going on about this. And then I'm going to tell you about the qualitative questions that were going on. So let's start with, who are we? So could you raise your hands if you are living in a country outside your country of origin? Okay. And could you raise your hand if you have lived in 2 or more countries? 3 or more? 4 or more? 5 or more? We're starting to count now. Wow. 6? Andy's winning. And Amy, is that your name? Yeah. All right. Amy and Andy. All right. 7.
Too fast, I can't count.
Oh. Okay, we got 2 people still. What's your name? Leslie. Okay, Leslie and Andy. 8 or more countries. All right, let's stop. Let's stop right there. Okay, could you, with the person next to you, or in 3s, go through your timeline like I just did, but don't talk about why you went to each country, because that's going to come later after I've given you some frameworks, right? Just like me. Colombia, then Portugal, then Spain, etc., like that. Person next to you. Your timeline of different countries. somebody to talk to. Can she join in with you? Yeah. We actually lived in the same house in Lisbon. You need a group. Can he join your group? Yeah.
My next teaching was in Japan, and then I went to the United States where I lived for most of my life. And then I went to France for France, and that's where I'm living now. I don't know where I'm going to be living after the summer. Depends on who offers me a job. So I still have to come back here. Yeah, that's like it is. Definitely an expat. And then I have a permanent position in California now, and I've been looking it up.
You're starting to talk about reasons. I can hear you. Okay. So when I arrived back in the United States and I started teaching at the School for International Training, one of the first classes they assigned me to teach was intercultural communication for language teachers, assuming that since I'd lived in all these countries, I would be a match to teach that course. It wasn't until I taught it 3 times that I was starting to feel that it was my course and that I was feeling comfortable with it and I understood what was going on. Hi. And I learned that there's a distinction between being experience-rich and theory-poor. And I didn't really know who I was as a cultural being. I could give a story. I could give many stories. I could talk about this and that, but I couldn't really describe how I viewed the world as a cultural person. And so here's some of the theory that I've come across that helped me to understand things. So, cultural identity. These are all on that yellow sheet you've got. So one way of depicting cultural identity comes from Singer, who relies on group affiliations. And he distinguishes between 2 types of groups, perceptual groups and identity groups. Perceptual groups consist of groups of individuals who perceive aspects of the external world in a similar manner but do not communicate these perceptions among themselves. So these are individuals who are not actually in a group. Once they do communicate these common perspectives, then they become an identity group. So this distinction helps to explain how persons may see the world from a perspective of gender or religion or marital status or race. But until they communicate their shared perspective, they do not necessarily identify with others of this particular group. So an important feature here is that Martin and Nakayama refer to this self-identification as avowal or avowed identities. We identify with others who think as we do. So, our identification with others is only part of the role of groups in identity. The other part is outside our control and depends on others. Based on their perceptions, others in the culture assign persons to groups. So features such as skin color, appearance, accent, age, gender, dress, vocabulary, possessions, all are ways of classifying people into groups. So we, in a word, we are labeled by others. And these labels may or may not correspond to the avowed identity groups of these people. So Martin and Nakayama call these ascribed identities, and I'm going to give you a task to help you work through this in a second. So the avowed, what I think of myself, and ascribed, what other people think of me, how they describe me, identities, turn around those two perceptions, how different people perceive and identify themselves as opposed to others. So here's what we're going to look at next. So this is a task we're going to do, looking at, and I'm going to give you an example of myself so you can figure out before you have to do this. So avowed identities is how I see myself, and ascribed is how other people see me. And the first time I came across this exercise was just before I was going to go back to the States for the first time. And I saw this in a book by one of my colleagues, Pat Moran, called Teaching Culture, Perspectives and Practice. And you have a bibliography of works I'm going to refer to on the last page there. So I had been living outside of the United States for 25 years. I was just about to go back, and I did this exercise. And this is just one aspect. Well, I looked at it. So, avowed. So I saw myself as internationalized. I had lived in lots of different cultures, and I was definitely a product of all those experiences. But I was aware that I was American conditioned. The way I thought about schooling, for example, what came naturally to me. You know, a lot of the things from my childhood, the way I ordered certain things. I knew that. I was aware that there was these two things going on. But other people, and this is what I'm going to ask you to do, is to try to identify who is it that's thinking of you in another way. So people who were non-Americans, they saw me as American. I'd been in London for 15 years. My accent had modified quite a bit. Everything I did, you know, I was a product of London, but no, get into a taxi driver, where are you from? Everybody always saw me as American. They saw me as a strong American woman. But Americans, they were a bit confused about how they saw me. I talked a bit funny, so they all thought I had an English accent. So they saw me as American and not American. They knew I was some other kind of creature. So I'm going to give you a chance to do this now. Go through and just pick up one or two things. How you see yourself, and then how do others see you? And then say, who are those others you're thinking about? So I was talking about Americans, non-Americans. That's what I was doing. Give you a few minutes for this, and then share with the person next to you. I know it's late. Just do one. Just do one. Yeah. Anything.
That makes it more complicated.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
One for senior teacher, I guess. It's on the website. It may not be a senior teacher.
Can we get a couple of examples? Anybody willing to share your example? Hugh?
I find it a really difficult and really interesting question. And for me, the first thing I thought of was actually in terms of my own cultural identity as an English person. And I don't know how many other native speaker English people are in the audience, but just in terms of the kind of class system and the class background, and I feel like I suspect many language tutors actually come from similar backgrounds, which is to do with being kind of half class. Because I think my dad's sort of working class London and my mum's middle class Northern. And my dad's side of the family see me as sort of being posh. And when I went to university, people saw me as sort of being the opposite. And I feel like I've carried these two conflicts around in my life. And I suspect it's one of the things that's pushed me or propelled me into working in an environment away predominantly from English native speakers. Because I think that the idea of working with English native speakers who are constantly kind of placing you in this peculiar social scale that we're sort of randomly obsessed with.
That's a great example.
It was not an idea that appealed to me. And when I work with foreign students, they just see me as being very English. And they don't place me as being, oh, you're from this background or that background,
right.
in the way that I think English people do. And I think it's particularly English.
Yeah.
I think it's not Scottish or Welsh or, I think it's a really English thing.
Yeah. One of my questions actually on the questionnaire was, when living abroad, has your economic class been higher, lower, the same, or did it depend on the country? Yeah. I didn't find anything terribly conclusive, but I thought it was an interesting question to ask. Just to tease that out. Is that why? Could that possibly be a reason that people leave or stay? So that's interesting. Yeah. One more example. Yes. What's your name?
I can relate to what this gentleman is saying. My background is Australia, native Australian, but I work with the British Council.
Can other people hear? Okay.
I work with the British Council, currently in Kuwait, but prior to that in Libya. And I was just sharing the story here of my first meeting with my British colleagues in Libya a few years ago, was I was quite struck by, I don't mean to be offensive here, but I was quite struck by a different attitude work as a senior teacher and academic manager, and therefore I'm managing essentially English or British teachers. Okay, and I quite enjoy that aspect of my background, being that larrikin sort of egalitarianness that comes from my Australian identity, working with British teachers, and there's a repartee that occurs because of that.
Okay, great. Okay, so we've just been talking about perceptual groups versus identity groups. We talked about avowed and ascribed identities. We're going to look at cultural marginality now. Anybody read the book Eat, Pray, Love?
Oh, yeah.
Great book, great book. Did you notice when you were reading a Sanskrit word that she used? Did you notice it? I have no idea how to pronounce this. Anybody familiar with Sanskrit in here? Antivasan? Yeah. Yeah. So living on the border, something that she talked about in there. So it's a Sanskrit word that means one who lives at the borders. And apparently it originally referred to people who chose to leave the safety of their homes and venture out to the edge of the forest where the spirits dwelt, in order to uncover the answers to the sacred in their lives. And Elizabeth Gilbert, in Eat, Pray, Love, described it as living on that shimmering line between your old thinking and your new understanding. And I wrote that down, and I kept it around with me for ages. You know, I was kind of thinking ahead. I wanted to do this project, and that was always there, living on the border. Is that part of why we do it? We like living on the edge of things. We like being different. More questions, more questions. The more I thought about the expatriate identity, the more questions I had. What are the answers to this? What are we about? So Janet Bennett describes cultural identity in terms of individuals' relationship among identity groups, and in particular in relationship to dominant groups. Okay, so us as expats, we are not the dominant groups in the countries where we're living, right? So she uses the notion of marginality to describe the rapport that persons of non-dominant communities have with dominant communities, suggesting that there are two essential responses: encapsulated marginality and constructive marginality. The first are persons who allow the dominant groups to ascribe their identity, whereas constructive marginals are persons with avowed identities with a relativistic outlook, not dependent on particular group affiliations, who are capable of moving among all communities. Janet Bennett's analysis is useful in considering how group affiliations affect a person's identity, particularly in situations that may be oppressive or diminishing a person. So I picked out just some of the characteristics of these two, and we're going to read this across. So an encapsulated marginal has no recognized reference group, whereas a constructive marginal has a reference group, and that is being a marginal. Might be other expats. That's your group. An encapsulated marginal is conscious of self, whereas a constructive marginal is conscious of choice. Now here's a question for you. Are refugees ever called expatriates? Encapsulated, troubled by ambiguity. Constructive, intrigued by complexity. That's something that got me going as well. Is one of the reasons we stay abroad because we're attracted to complexity? We like exercising those skills. And encapsulated marginal, never at home. Constructive marginal, never not at home. I love that. Okay, so I'm going to tell you about the survey now. So there's a couple of people who've done my survey. Amy, you said you had done it, and Andy and Nikki did it. You were part of the pilot for it, yeah. So what I did was I put together, there's two different surveys. The first one is quantitative, It's very quick. It takes 10 minutes to go through. I was just gathering information. The last question on the quantitative one is, if you'd be willing to be involved in the qualitative research, would you be willing? And give me your name. I sent it out to all of the ITEFL SIG coordinators who put it on their listservs, maybe. And I sent it out. You did. Okay. And I sent it out to all of the S.I.T. Graduate Institute alums, which is a very loyal group of people. That's how come Amy got it, right? And Andy. And then some people then asked if they could put it on more lists. So somebody put it on the JALT list. So it spread pretty wildly. I couldn't get International House to do it for me, though. It spread pretty wildly, and it's still open. Over 200 people have done the quantitative one, and over 100 people have said they'd be willing to do the qualitative one. And it's still open, and I'm going to be talking to you about the quantitative results, and about 35 people so far has done the qualitative one. So that's ongoing, but I can tell you what the initial findings are. So one of the questions was, what motivated you to go live in each country? And the way it's worded is you have all these different things down one side, and then it's country 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So people are trying to figure out for what motivated you for each country to move on. So just for yourself, could you just pick one of your countries and just think what were some of the reasons for you going to a particular country? Just think about it. Okay, here's some of the results by country. These are the top 3 by country. So country 1, this is the large one, over 200 people, the quantitative one. So, excuse me, what you need to know is, in order to fill in the survey, you had to have lived in at least 2 countries and for a total of 6 years.
Is it each country?
No, a total, yeah. Yeah, so that's pretty low. Whereas what happened was the people who chose to do the qualitative one, they were much more experienced people. They were much, I think, more intrigued to find out more. So there was a big difference. But for this one, that's all you had to have. So country 1, what motivated you to go? The top was travel. Number 1 was travel. Number 2 was adventure. Number 3 was Peace Corps. Okay? If they went on to a second country, this is what it turned out to be. Professional development became first. Culture, love of teaching, enters into the second year. Love of teaching gets first place in country 3. Career advancement gets in here. Economics comes in country 4. This is the same for country 5, but a different order. Family comes in for country 6. Attracted to change and risk. I like that one. Love of teaching comes back. I guess if you've been in 7 countries and you're going to an 8 and you're still not going home. Right, precisely. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, yes, go.
People born either in the UK or in the United States?
I didn't have a way of knowing. It's people who are living outside the country of origin.
That was the only thing you stipulated.
Right. I do have information about this, the second one, though. I asked them, and I'll tell you about that in a second. So, yeah, so I don't know where. These are all teachers of English. They might be native, they might be non-native. They're living outside of their country of origin.
Peace Corps suggests that there's probably more Americans than S.I.T.
Probably. But in fact, in the qualitative one, UK, US was about even. Yeah. Okay. So that's the way that one worked out. All right. I guess I'll leave that up for a bit. So then I asked a question. If you have returned to your country of origin, how important were these reasons? It's the same, not exactly the same list. I took a few things away, like Peace Corps. So if you've returned to your country of origin, how important were these? And people had to rank them then. Extremely important, important. I think it was on a 3 or 4-point scale. Or if you think you might return someday, how important would these reasons be? And then rate them. And the number one reason was family. Well spotted. So that was interesting. Okay, then there was a question. There was a question about who your closest friends were. So I was trying to get at identity groups here. So it was again divided by country, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, down to 8. And then the possibilities were other expat teachers, other teachers of English, other expats, your family, people from previous countries where you lived. And this varied. In the first 4 countries, mostly people put other expat language teachers. So we got an identity group there. So then I wanted to find out, what are the personalities of people who live in different countries? What are the skills you've got? And through my reading, I was picking out, and I came up with a list finally with 19 different things. And I'm just going to read these off. I am tolerant of ambiguity. I'm non-judgmental. I have empathy. Now, let me just tell you before I carry on that these people are supposed to rate themselves in a 4-point scale, and these people rated themselves high in all of these. I'm tolerant of ambiguity. I'm non-judgmental. I have empathy. I have a willingness to communicate. I'm curious. I'm perceptive. I'm warm in human relationships. I'm self-reliant. I like helping others. I have a sense of humor. I have a strong sense of self. I'm a high achiever. I'm self-motivated. I have a willingness to learn from failure. I enjoy being different from others. I enjoy experimentation. I'm able to let go. I'm able to manage stress. And I'm able to access support. So the top 8. What do you think the top 1 was?
enjoy being different.
No, it didn't actually come in with the top 8. I would have guessed that too. Yeah, yeah. I am curious was number 1. Now this is over 200 teachers who may have only been living abroad for 6 years. I'm curious was number 1. I'm self-reliant was number 2. I have a willingness to communicate was 3. I like helping others. I have empathy. I'm perceptive. I'm self-motivated. And I have a strong sense of self. So that's the top 8 in that order. What do you think was at the bottom of the list? I'm able to let go. I'm able to manage stress. And I'm able to access supports. But it still wasn't low. People weren't ranking themselves low in that area, but those were the lowest. Just a quick reaction to that with the person next to you. Just 1 minute. What do you think about that? Okay, that's a minute. Yeah, yeah.
Do you think there's a degree to which those questions are kind of culturally coded?
Sorry?
Do you think there's a degree to which those kind of questions are culturally coded? Because I mean, as an English person, I feel really uncomfortable giving myself high scores for those kind of things. I feel it makes you sound sort of pompous. If you say like, oh, I have empathy, 10. Oh, I'm a wonderful adapter, 10. I feel really.
English people have huge problems with being honest. I totally agree.
I would feel really. I would just be like average.
Yeah, that's a cultural difference.
I feel really
We don't
uncomfortable
have that, you know.
giving myself high scores for that stuff.
I actually missed one.
Just a second. I don't think I have a... See, I don't have names for the first one where I asked this question, so I can't go back and you know, after you do this sort of thing, you go, oh, I wish I'd worded it this way or done it that way. This is through SurveyMonkey. And once you make it live, you cannot change anything without, you know, just deleting all the data. But that's an interesting point, to be able to tease that out to see if there was a cultural difference. But it just looked at me that people rated themselves very high. So I'll come right back to you. So my question was, is that one reason why people don't go home? I mean, if the main reason is I'm curious, that's the main thing about me. I'm curious, and I think, oh, I can't go home. I'm not curious about home. Whatever. Yes, what were you going to say?
Yeah, well, I actually missed one because what does curious mean? Is it interested in other cultures? Because I actually missed that one. And then again, what do you mean by living in a different country? Is it just living there and having expat friends, or is it living there and...
It's just, I always worded it as living outside your country of origin.
Yeah, but I mean, you have people who go to a different country and they will have expat friends and not really local friends. So not integrated. Yeah, they don't really integrate. So that was actually one question. Might as well not be there. Well, I don't know. It depends on what you want, of course.
Yeah. I actually had a student who lived in Japan for many, many years, and he'd never learned a word of Japanese intentionally because he loved the silence in his brain because nobody expected him to be able to communicate. He's an exception. In fact, I'm going to talk about that in a second. So this is just for ages, if you're interested in the quantitative one. The majority are in their, just a slight group in their 40s, basically. There's a tiny, tiny group of people in their 70s.
You can't expect anybody in their 20s or 30s because you're asking for a large number of countries visited. So
Yeah, but it's interesting because when we go to talk about the quality, well, me too. When I was 39, I was starting my 5th country, I think.
Yeah, at 29, I think I've been to 5, worked in 5 different countries.
Yeah.
Not just, I've lived in more than 5, but I've worked and taught English in 5.
Yeah.
Yeah, the same for me. When I was 29, I was on about country guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, I lived in 6 years.
Yeah.
Mine especially, because in your 20s, you're not actually, you don't have the family with you, so you do move around. I moved around an awful lot.
Maybe you're more curious.
Yeah.
You slow down a little bit.
Right. So in this, we're still talking about the quantitative one. I found that there were slightly more women than men that filled it out, but only slightly. I asked a question about where you were in your family, oldest, middle child, youngest, only child, and there was a slight preference for oldest child. I asked a question about language. What was your language ability at the end of living in each country? So again, it was divided up by country, and it was like advanced, late intermediate, pre-intermediate, beginners. And pretty much in the first country, people got up to the advanced level, a very high level, and from then it just drops right down. Okay, so that's about the quantitative one, where I didn't have information about the individuals. I didn't have names. I didn't know about their countries. I'm just grabbing facts. And now I'm going to tell you a bit about the qualitative one. The majority, as I said, were from the United States and the United Kingdom, but I had one person each from Pakistan, India, Uzbekistan, Romania, South Africa, Australia, and Canada. The range of years living abroad was between 6 and 45 years, with the average being 15, and that was much higher than others. The number of countries lived in, the average was 4. And asking how many people were still living outside their country of origin, it was 65%. So I think the people who chose to do the qualitative one are people who are really interested, because that's what their life has been, living in other countries. The majority, just slightly, were in the range of the 30s. So people who, yeah. And gender, the majority were men who filled in the qualitative survey. Place in the family shifted to being the youngest in the family. How about you? How many people are the youngest in your family in this room? Only a few. How about the oldest? Interesting. Okay. I'm just going to run very quickly through some of the other things that I found. When I started doing the literature search, I didn't expect to find very much. And in fact, I found a lot that was worth reading. In fact, I spent a fortune on books, because I thought, oh, I've got to get that one, I've got to get that one. You'd read something and they'd say, oh, I'd read about that and stuff. And there's a lot. And I ended up dividing up the literature into 5. One is the spread of English over the globe. And this is one thing that I'm going to be, when I talk about next steps, is we talk about the spread of English like it's a thing that spreads through the air or something. And what we need to be thinking about is, how did that English spread? So looking at the literature through that lens is quite an interesting one. And from the survey, the second survey, a lot of people are commenting on that. So that's how the literature gets divided up, including books on preparing to become an expatriate. So these are, you know, if you're a wife and you're going out to this country with your husband, you know, that's good. But the thing is that they are all written by experienced expats. So if you look at it through that lens, they're actually worthwhile reading. These are the particularly intriguing sources. Bill Johnston has written The Expatriate Teacher as Postmodern Paladin, and I'm going to talk a bit about that. The ESL Teacher as Moral Agent. There's actually a whole lot of literature now on Christian evangelicals going out and using the teaching of English as a way of proselytizing. TESOL has not a SIG, but a caucus on Christians and evangelicals teaching English. He writes a lot about values and morals. What are your values, and how overt are they in your teaching and in your expat living? And are your values different from the people from your country of origin? And then I'm going to talk about this one as well. 3 perspectives of theorizing language teacher identity. And then this one, and I put the year on this one because 2009, this guy actually did his PhD on exactly what my study is, which was part of my sabbatical. And so when I was trying to get it through interlibrary loan, just to get hold of his PhD, I found he'd even published it, and it's great. And I'm going to tell you about it. Traveler's Tale, the Expatriate English Language Teacher in the New Global Culture. Okay, so this is a fun one. Bill Johnston says that there are provocative parallels between EFL teachers and medieval knights errant. He talks about postmodernity, which has a concern with marginality and with those traditionally marginalized in social and other ways. And he talks about postmodernity dealing with encounters that take place in marginal or border territory, and he suggests that ELT as a whole is a marginal occupation. Okay. this one. So looking at language teacher identity, 3 ways. One is social identity theory, which is looking at teacher identity as not fixed, and it's not context-free. It's constructed, and it's maintained and negotiated to a significant extent through language and discourse. Another way of looking at it is community of practice. So looking at language teacher identity through situated learning, that we learn through the situations and the context where we are teaching. And it's a process of becoming part of a community of practice. And this is the 3rd way, something called image text, which is looking at teacher identity through the perceptions of our students. Okay. Now, this one that I was talking about, although he's doing the same kind of study that I'm doing, and he has similar research questions, and he basically did case studies rather than different kinds of it, he's using a framework by Appadurai. Anybody ever heard of that? Appadurai, who has his view of the disruptive nature of globalization has led him to categorize global cultural and economic flows in 5 dimensions. Ethnoscapes refer to how people choose or are forced by economic need to travel the world to find work and income. Oops. He looks at mediascapes, which are the flow of culture through forms of communication. And this means that the reproduction of a range of social institutions like dress or home building becomes more subject to global influences. Idioscapes describe ideological messages relating to modernity and the reactions it's had in various differing political systems. So this is all that he calls them scapes, things that are flowing from culture to culture and now are pervasive around the world, and he puts them into 5 dimensions. Technoscapes refer to how mass production is becoming globally integrated to supply mass consumption. And financescapes refer to economic flow as in the 24-hour dealings of a global economy. Okay, so that's some of the literature that I went through that helped inform me. What I want to do now is to finish off by telling you a bit about the qualitative questions that I asked in the 2nd survey, and there were 8. And what I did was when I got the names of people from the 1st survey who were willing to do that, I sent them an email, and I gave them the questions in advance so that when they were online, they weren't thinking it through. So those of you who did this one, did you spend time thinking about it? No. Andy, did you, or did you just go in and do it? The qualitative one.
I just went in, I didn't...
You didn't pre-think it?
...to one side, and then, no, I spent whatever it was, half an hour answering questions.
Right.
As I saw it.
Right. Okay. So these are the questions. And I'm just going to give you a few highlights. Some people talked of being more tolerant, but they weren't sure if that was just maturity or being able to look at the country of origin through different lenses. Some people talked about being an ambassador for their own culture, felt that they had dispelled stereotypes and expanded their students' worldview. There was a humility in this one. I loved reading these responses. This one and the next one, yeah. So this one, so they talked about made an impact on people. Right, let's go on to the next one. In what ways do you feel the cultures of the countries where you've lived have had an impact on you? And one person talked about how they become a part of you like rings on a tree. They felt they had been stretched and expanded in terms of humanity and tolerance. What's your perception of the role of English in the world today? Culture-bound or truly international? Well, people had strong opinions about this both ways and in the middle. So, I didn't get any information from that question. And this one. The expatriate teachers of English have had an influence on the spread of English around the world. One person wrote that if English were a drug, expat teachers would be the dealers. One person talked about expat teachers created a huge community of teachers around the world. Well-traveled expat teachers make learning more interesting and are likely to be tolerant. One person wrote, "We teach the future leaders of the countries that we're in." And one person wrote, "All those young teachers willing to travel around the world make English more attainable for the masses." Interesting, huh? An influence on trends in teacher training around the world. This one, and in the question before that, people talked about the creation and spread of professional teachers' organizations. That's an interesting one. Very often it's the expats who start up the teachers' organizations as a way of linking with others, maybe because they're outside of their own countries of origin. One person wrote, "Expatriates are happy living abroad, so they bring their low stress into their teaching." And one person wrote, which I find is very interesting, and I'll continue to think about this one, is think about when Chinese or Arabic becomes the global language, and they send their young people or their teachers around the world. What kind of culture of education are they going to be bringing with them? And that's made me start to think about, because I've for some years now been thinking, English is dissociated from culture. It doesn't belong to the native speakers anymore. But now I'm starting to think all these people who've been traveling around and what the culture they're bringing, it's not, drinking tea.
It is drinking.
Yes, yeah, I'm well aware of that. Yeah. But it is a certain kind of personality in living abroad. It's certain kinds of beliefs about joy in learning and about learning with. I think that's the next direction I'm going to start querying. Uh-oh, there's a furrowed brow there.
No, it's been interesting. I live and work in China, so what you've just said there kind of resonates a bit. I've been thinking a bit about Chinese people going abroad to teach Chinese, and there's a difference that has made me start thinking about like teaching methodology. Like you just said, people enjoy going abroad with English and the fun side of it, and bringing fun into classrooms. But one of the challenges that China and Chinese teachers going abroad face is reconciling their traditional notions of education with these young Western, let's say, if they're going to Western countries, people who want to have fun in the classroom. No, but that's not what happens. They're supposed to sit and listen to me. So there's some kind of difference. I've only just started thinking about it.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, yeah, Nikki.
Can I just say, we're talking about China. I wonder what percentage of English teachers are expats. Surely it must be absolutely minute in terms of within China. How many people who are teaching English? How many of those are expats? There's one here, and maybe I don't know how many more.
Yeah.
But very few. So in terms of the culture being part of the language, I mean, I remember reading an article about English being taught in Vietnam using the Headway books, which has a communicative approach. And in the study that was done in the LTJ article that's written, the Vietnamese teachers subverted entirely the methodology that the book was purporting to use, and used it for kind of cold drilling. So they used it within the framework methodology that they felt was appropriate for their context. So I'm not quite sure what point I'm making here, but I'm sure it's an interesting one.
Yeah, yeah, and which we mustn't forget, that the native speakers are the minority teachers in the world who are teaching English right now. Yeah, I was just focusing on this particular group. And the last question is, what have you done for your own professional development since you started teaching English? And it's just vast what people have written about. I mean, obviously it's a self-selected group. But, I mean, just, I did this and this and this, and then a lot of professional development, and I will continue with my professional development, my personal development. Yeah. Okay. If you are interested in filling in any of these surveys, it's on your yellow sheet. I'll keep it open for a while. And